I still remember the first letter like it was fire in my hands. A crisp, official-looking envelope from my HOA. My stomach dropped as I tore it open. The words jumped out at me. You are in violation of HOA regulations. Immediate fines will be applied for keeping poultry on your property. Chickens. My chickens. The small flock I'd been raising since last spring. Innocent little creatures that clucked and pecked in the sun. Suddenly became illegal. I couldn't believe it. I had carefully researched the rules before bringing them home. They were tiny, they were quiet, they didn't smell. The HOA's obsession with perfection was legendary, but this felt personal. And the fines, they weren't small. Hundreds of dollars every week. It felt like they were punishing me for daring to enjoy life the way I wanted. I stared at the coop in my backyard, my 4 hens pecking lazily at the ground. I felt a mix of frustration, disbelief, and a simmering defiance. This wasn't just about chickens. It was about control. About someone trying to dictate every little aspect of my life. I'd bought this house for freedom, not to be micromanaged by a committee obsessed with white picket fences and perfectly trimmed hedges. The next morning, I marched to the HOA office, the letter clutched tightly in my hand. I demanded answers, expecting some explanation, some compromise. What I got was a lecture. A woman with a perfectly pressed blazer and a tone dripping with superiority told me, "Rules are rules. You either remove the chickens or face escalating fines." I left that office burning with anger and determination. I wasn't about to give up my chickens, or my rights. That night, I sat under the stars, the clucking of my hens in the background, and made a decision. I wasn't going to live by their rules anymore. I would find a way to fight back, to reclaim control of my own yard, my own life. Little did I know, that decision would spark a series of events that would completely turn the HOA upside down. I started documenting everything, reading the bylaws line by line, and brainstorming strategies that didn't just comply with the law. They outsmarted the petty rules altogether. My little backyard experiment was about to become a full-blown rebellion. This was more than chickens. It was freedom, pride, and proving that I wasn't going to be bullied by an organization that thought it had power over my life. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight my way. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I wasn't going to remove my chickens, and I wasn't going to pay another dollar in fines. Instead, I decided to study the HOA's own rules like a detective. I printed every regulation, every amendment, every tiny clause, and laid them across the dining table. The more I read, the more I realized they had overreached in several areas. Ambiguities, outdated clauses, contradictions. My inner strategist smiled. I started small, documenting my flock. Photos, videos, timelines, even audio recordings of my hens' activity. They were quiet, they weren't causing damage, and I could prove it. I created a binder, a kind of evidence portfolio that would later become my secret weapon. Meanwhile, I noticed something curious. The HOA's definition of livestock was vague. Chickens weren't mentioned specifically. Could this be the loophole I needed? Feeling confident, I drafted my first response letter. It was polite but firm, outlining exactly why the fines were unjustified and citing their own ambiguous rules. I delivered it to the HOA office and waited. Hours later, I received a response, a generic dismissal, full of legal jargon but lacking any substance. They assumed intimidation would work. Little did they know, I was just getting started. Over the next week, I began subtly turning my backyard into a fortress of freedom. I built a more elaborate coop, installed a small fenced area that actually improved the yard's aesthetics, and even planted flowers around the enclosure. I wasn't just keeping chickens. I was making a statement. Neighbors started noticing. Some whispered encouragement, others were skeptical, but I could see their curiosity growing. Then came the first confrontation. A HOA representative came by, clipboard in hand, expecting me to cower. Instead, I greeted them calmly, offering a tour of my compliant backyard. I showed them the coop, the clean surroundings, and even pointed out how quiet the hens were. Their expression shifted from smug certainty to confusion. They had assumed fear. They got confidence. By the end of that visit, it was clear. I wasn't just standing my ground. I was rewriting the narrative. The HOA's power depended on people complying without question. I was breaking that rule. Every interaction became a small victory. Every observation a chance to build my case. My little rebellion was spreading, quietly inspiring others to question the petty regulations that controlled their lives. I realized then that the chickens were only the beginning. The real fight was about control, respect, and reclaiming space in a world obsessed with conformity. And I was ready to take it further. I knew it was coming, the moment they realized I wasn't going to back down. And sure enough, one sunny afternoon, a formal notice appeared on my door. Second violation. Fines have doubled. Immediate removal of all poultry is required. My stomach sank, but this time anger was joined by strategy. They thought fear would work. They didn't know I had plans. I spent that evening going over my binder of evidence. Photos, videos, notes, and every communication with the HOA, all meticulously organized. I was ready to respond, but not just with words. I had realized that compliance alone wouldn't win this fight. This was about exposing their overreach and proving I wasn't a lawbreaker. I was a homeowner exercising my rights. The next morning, I sent a detailed rebuttal, citing every ambiguous clause in their bylaws, emphasizing how my chickens posed no threat, and attaching proof of my backyard's pristine condition. I didn't hold back. I even included a simple chart comparing my property to other neighbors' yards, showing that their so-called violations were inconsistent and arbitrary. By evening, the HOA's response arrived. This time it wasn't just a letter. It was a thinly veiled threat. They mentioned legal action, potential liens, and even hinted at a public hearing. But instead of intimidation, their words lit a fire. I realized they were desperate. My calm, organized resistance was dismantling their authority faster than I could have imagined. Determined to escalate, I started gathering support. I quietly spoke to neighbors, sharing my story and pointing out the absurdity of the fines. To my surprise, several admitted they'd secretly been frustrated by similar, petty rules but had been too intimidated to speak up. I encouraged them, offered advice, and reminded them that knowledge is power. By week's end, I wasn't just a lone rebel. I had a small coalition of allies willing to challenge the HOA's authority. Then came the showdown. At the next HOA meeting, I attended in person, my binder in hand. I calmly presented my case, addressing every complaint with facts and documentation. The room, once filled with smug authority, grew tense. Members whispered, uncertain how to respond. I had turned the tables. They couldn't bully me, and now they had to justify their own rules in front of the community. By the end of the meeting, I left with a quiet sense of victory. I hadn't just defended my chickens, I had exposed the HOA's overreach and built momentum. I knew this fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt in control. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was leading. After that HOA meeting, everything changed. The tension in the neighborhood shifted subtly, like a breeze finally breaking through a stifling heat. People no longer whispered, they started asking questions. Some even came by my yard, curious about my chickens, the neat coop, the little garden I had built around it. My rebellion had grown into something bigger than me. It wasn't just about poultry anymore, it was about autonomy and proving that one person could stand up to arbitrary authority. The next notice from the HOA was surprising. They suggested a compromise. I laughed quietly to myself. Compromise wasn't what I wanted. I wanted freedom. I wanted control over my own property without fear of fines or judgment. So I ignored their suggestion, choosing instead to document everything meticulously and continue operating within the bounds of the law. Every chicken, every coop upgrade, every cluck became part of my silent but unassailable argument. Neighbors began reaching out more openly. Some confessed they had always wanted chickens, or other small livestock, but feared HOA repercussions. Others offered advice, shared their own stories, and slowly a quiet community of resistance began forming. I realized then that what started as a personal fight had become a symbol of independence, proof that rules didn't have to be blindly obeyed if they were unreasonable or unjust. Then came the final moment. A new board election for the HOA was announced. I attended, not as a defendant or a complainant, but as a homeowner with a vision. I spoke openly at the meeting, pointing out inconsistencies, highlighting community needs, and demonstrating that control over personal property was more important than trivial fines. People listened. They voted. By a narrow but decisive margin, new leadership was installed. Leaders who respected homeowners' rights, practicality, and common sense. In the weeks that followed, the fines were rescinded, the notices stopped, and my backyard became exactly what I wanted it to be. A space of life, freedom, and creativity. My chickens roamed, pecking happily in the sun. Flowers bloomed around the coop. I had turned a conflict into a triumph. But more than that, I had learned something essential. Rules only have power if you let them. By standing firm, documenting meticulously, and showing unwavering resolve, I had reclaimed not just my chickens, but my confidence, my property, and my voice. Now, every time I hear the gentle clucking of my hens, I smile. This backyard isn't just mine, it's a statement. And anyone who dares to impose unreasonable rules on their life should remember, sometimes, the smallest creatures can inspire the biggest rebellions. Thanks for sticking with me through this backyard rebellion. If you loved seeing how I stood up to the HOA, Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any wild stories like this. Drop a like if you think everyone should be able to run their own yard, and leave a comment below. I want to hear your craziest HOA or neighborhood stories.